Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Ellen Pristek. I coordinate the Great Minds Salon. I'm pretty sure I know just about everybody, and I hope you all know me. Um, Welcome to our very first Great Minds Salon of the year. We have four on the calendar, and I'm really very, very pleased to welcome Ari Meisel tonight, who will be our presenter. I'll tell you a little bit about Ari first, and then I will turn it over to him. Ari likes to have a conversation during his presentation, so I'm going to ask you if you have questions, put them in the chat or raise your hand, and Ari will, try to get to your questions. So tell you a little bit about him, and then I will spotlight him so you will all be able to see him. And if you're not, asking a question, just stay muted while he's speaking. Ari Meisel is a world-renowned productivity expert and accomplished author, dedicated to redefining how people approach their work and life. Residing in Princeton, New Jersey, Ari not only has a passion for optimizing tasks, but also harbors a love for woodworking. In addition to his professional endeavors, he proudly serves his community as a volunteer EMT and lieutenant at the local rescue squad, and has an unwavering commitment to his town. Through his multifaceted talents and services, he showcases the epitome of community engagement and productivity mastery. And those of you who've attended before, I like to claim a student, and I'm happy to have Ari's oldest child of his five, Ben, as one of my students. And I look forward to having his others in the future. So my pleasure. I now present Ari Meisel.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you everybody for spending the evening here with me. My voice, I'm at the end of a cold, so if my voice is a little croaky, I apologize, but we should be fine. As Ellen mentioned, I really like to be. I want to make this as interactive as possible. I don't want to just talk at you all for this entire time. So as questions come up, please, you can do the raise hand feature. You can put them in the chat, or you can just, there's a lot of people on here, so maybe that's probably the best way. Raise hand or put it in the chat, and I'll get to it right away. A lot of the things that I teach and have always taught in productivity are pretty across the board, kind of counterintuitive for a lot of people. And so if something really doesn't make sense, or you don't agree with it, please stop me, and we can clarify. I want to make this as practical, tactical, and useful for all of you as possible. And then the other thing I just want to preface this with is that I do things on a pretty wide spectrum in terms of technology. So there's a very important framework and sort of philosophy and mindset behind what I teach. And at the same time, I do a lot of things with a lot of pretty advanced technologies. I don't want to make any suppositions or assumptions about the audience here. So I'm going to sort of move back and forth on that spectrum, and as if something seems too technological, then you can tell me. Generally speaking, technology will amplify habits. So if you have good habits, it's going to make them better, and if you have bad habits, it's going to make them worse, faster. So this is not about technology. There's lots and lots of cool apps and tools and things that you can use to be more productive and get more stuff done. At the end of the day, none of that matters if you don't have good habits or frameworks to base that on. So that's really what this is about. Just to give you some really quick context on me and why I do this and sort of where I'm coming from. So when I was 20, I graduated from the University of Pennsylvania from the Wharton School undergrad a year early. Not because I was particularly a good student, but because I was just so efficient and productive. I ended up graduating with 2 majors and 2 minors. And then I went, this was in 2003 from Wharton. So 99% of my classmates went into finance. I went into construction. Surprised a lot of people, not the least of which myself. I went to upstate New York to visit a friend in Binghamton. And while I was there, he showed me these old buildings from the 1860s that used to be cigar warehouses. and these beautiful, beautiful buildings. I had grown up in Soho in Manhattan. My parents, my father's been an art dealer there for over 50 years and was part of the group that got Soho named Soho. So I grew up in a chocolate factory. So I got to see these buildings and I thought I could build lofts. I was 20 years old. And I began that project with help from some economic development funds that were happening on the time in Binghamton, and spent the next 3 years because getting a real estate degree at an Ivy League school doesn't really teach you how to build anything. So the deal was anybody that worked on the job had to teach me their trade. And so I spent the next 3 years learning and doing every construction trade there is. I got particularly fond of masonry, and I learned project management and legality or legal aspects, political things. I was in the news every week pretty much. So I crash course of media training and project management and leadership. I had a group, I had 60 people working for me at one point. And when I was 23, 3 years later, the project was done. I was in $3 million of personal debt and got diagnosed with Crohn's disease. So I'm sure many of you know what Crohn's is. At the time, it was a lot less known than it is now, but it is considered to be incurable. As again, I'm sure a lot of you know, chronic inflammatory conditions affects the digestive tract. I got really, really, really sick and ended up in the hospital multiple times. And after a 2-year long bout of Crohn's and lots of medicine, I was taking 16 pills a day at one point, I started to turn things around. And I got into what's known as biohacking, and I was eventually able to overcome the illness. And I've been pain-free and medicine-free for, I think, 12 or 14 years now. And I've replicated my results in dozens and dozens of other people who have an incurable illness. So that's sort of a different story. But the long and the short of what that did was that I went from working 18-hour days on a construction site to barely being able to do an hour of work in a given day because I was so weak and sick. And so that restriction on my time has become the genesis for everything that's come since then. So I love to always ask myself and other people in these sort of settings, I'm not asking you now, but what would you do if you could only work an hour a day? And it's a really interesting question because if you ask somebody who works a 9 to 5, like, what would you do if you could only work till 4? You know, you got to leave the office an hour early. Almost invariably, people say that they would skip lunch. But you ask that same person, what would you do if you could only work an hour? It's a really fascinating conversation because it requires such a different mindset. Because if you only had an hour, it's really not about what would you do, it's about what wouldn't you do? What would you not do? And if the things that you wouldn't do still had to be done, then who or what is going to do them for you? And so that has sort of been the basis of everything since then. So since then, I've written a dozen books. I've spoken around the world, coached thousands of people at this point, and now I'm here. So the framework that I use for everything productivity-wise is optimize, automate, outsource. And I want to talk about that for a minute, and then we'll get into some specifics. So that order is very important. When I say outsource, we can use that as delegate as well. But delegate and outsourcing is the same or interchangeable. So show of physical hands, those of you who have your cameras on, how many of you have ever outsourced or delegated something to anybody? Most of you probably have, but raise your hand if you have. Thank you. Okay. Now, how many of you have ever had a bad experience outsourcing something or delegating something? Right. So invariably, when I ask that, more people raise their hand the second time. Right. So more of you have had a bad experience outsourcing something than have ever outsourced something. That's what I'm getting from that. Now, the funny thing about that is that it's probably your fault. And so we can fix that here. Because what happens with outsourcing and delegating a lot of times is that people do it as a sort of a knee-jerk reaction, is that's the first thing that they go to, right? We see a problem that we don't want to deal with, we don't know how to deal with, or we're frustrated by or something like that. The natural reaction from a lot of people is to say, well, let me find somebody else to do it for me. And you know, if you're in a fortunate position where you can have somebody do that, then that's great. But the problem is if you try to outsource an inefficient problem, a problem that is not well defined, so you're giving it to somebody who has less information, less context than you do, while at the same time expecting them to produce a superior result than you would have produced yourself. It's kind of a recipe for disaster. So that's why we start with optimize every time. So with optimization, what I'm talking about is really identification, tracking, looking at what the problem that we have at hand is. once we do that, and I'm going to give you some examples. Once we do that, then we start to look at automation. And when I started doing this, over a decade ago, automation was a lot more limited than it is now. Nowadays, we can automate things that a week ago we had to hire a person to do, and we can do it for free in some cases. And once we've done that, if there's anything left at that point, that's when we look at giving it off to another person, delegating or outsourcing to some sort of specialist or general. So just keep that framework in mind as we go through this. And now I want to give you an example of how that sort of looks in practice. So you don't all have to do this, but if a few of you could just drop in the chat, just guess on average how many steps you think it takes to pay a bill. If you're doing online bill pay, for example, just throw a number in the chat, please. 4, cool. 4, 3, great. 5, perfect. So all single digits. The answer is actually 23. Right. So if you think about it, it's like, well, you get the physical, let's say it's a physical bill. Most of our bills are not anymore. They're all electronic bills. Let's say we had a physical bill. So what are you doing with the actual physical bill itself? Do you put it in a folder? Do you scan it and send it to your accountant? Do you mail it? What do you do? Then we have to go actually do the paying, to log into the website for the paying. Maybe we have to add the person or the company as a new payee. Then we have to put the amount, the account, all the 23 steps. It happens very quickly. And what's fascinating about that is that any of you who wrote 4, 3, 5, or 4, you're going to outsource a 23-step process with 4 steps. And the person that you try to give that to doesn't know how to fill in the other things, basically. And it's an oversimplified example, but it's a pretty good one. So a lot of times what we have to do is really look at how we do the things that we do on a regular basis. And almost everything we do is an identifiable process, whether it's how you pay a bill or how you hire and fire somebody or how you make your lunch. All of these things are processes that we can start to look at. And when you take this sort of mindset of optimize, then automate, then outsource, that comes up quite a bit more often. Lynn, did you have a question? No, okay. So I want to talk about 3 main areas tonight. One is communication. Second one is project management or to-do lists, basically. And the third one is processes. Okay, so let's start with communication. So I know that several of you said that you, the different productivity challenges you had. How many of you, by show of hands, would say that email is something that is a productivity challenge for you? Okay, just a couple. Okay, that's fine. So the rest of you either don't use email or you're totally great with email. That's what I'm hearing? Okay. Anybody have an AOL account? No? Okay. Somebody just waved me off. Okay. So whether or not you find email to be a challenge, I'm going to talk about email for a moment because the email problem for most people is a really interesting one because to me, it's not an email problem. It's a decision-making problem. So I want to teach you a framework for making more efficient decisions in your life in general. But this actually does apply to email as well. And that's how I'll give it as an example, because if you do this, you can actually maintain inbox 0 and have a clean inbox. So if you think about an inbox, and again, this is using this as an example for decisions in general, the email inbox is sort of a unique situation in our lives where we have the opportunity to make what amounts to like thousands of decisions in a given day, right? Because there's just such a flood of information. A lot of people, unfortunately, see their inbox, whether consciously or unconsciously, as a to-do list that other people fill for you, which is a problem in and of itself. But there's an onslaught of things that are constantly asking for your attention, asking you to make decisions. Most research would tell us that we have about 24 good decisions in us in a given day as humans. Now, a lot of us probably do that before 8 in the morning. So that creates a problem. And part of it is that we see each email or each decision point as a completely new opportunity to make decisions. And we go through this sort of Rolodex of dozens of possible outcomes that we can do. But what we need to do is have an initial way of just sorting those into 3 different possible decisions. The 3 Ds is what I call it. So the first D is delete, right, which is an email one, but it could be deny, decline, basically saying no, right? So and this applies to absolutely any decision that comes your way the initial time you see that decision. Obviously, if somebody asks you what color of paint do you want in your house, the answer can't be no. But that's for a later time. Right now, we're talking about the initial interaction you have with that decision. So the first thing is to say no, delete, no. When it comes to email, something like 42% of the emails that people send replies to never required a response in the first place, for either party. Right. So when you send an email that's like, got it, or okay, you shouldn't do that, because there's a boomerang effect to email. The more email you send, the more email you will get. The second D is to deal with it. So if it's something that you can deal with right now, like in the next 2 to 3 minutes, and it doesn't require some sort of major mental shift, then you should deal with it right now. And this is a really important one, because most people tend to operate under the guise that there is this really interesting, quiet, undistracted place in the future called later, right? But that actually doesn't exist. Later is just saying, I'm going to make this future self's problem, but it's still you. So we need to deal with things right now that we actually can deal with right now. So when we get in that habit of saying like, oh, I'll just come back to this, or I'll get to this later, it'll only take a minute. That's very self-defeating language. People here talked about distractions and ADD and prioritization. That's a really bad one for fueling that in the wrong direction. Because one is where we're not valuing the decision. We're also not valuing our time correctly, because we're self-deluding, right? Because to say like, oh, there's going to be this magical time in 3 hours when no one's bothering me and nothing has piled up in the meantime that I can deal with this. Not to mention, we work better on different things at different times of the day. The most insidious aspect of not dealing with something right now that you can is if you're dealing with other people, whether they're on your team or they're vendors or employees behind your team or friends or family or clients. If you delay somebody else from doing something that they need to do because you wanted to deal with it later, there is a multiplier effect that happens there. And if it's your team that you're dealing with, right, and somebody needs a decision from you, and you delay them by 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, you could, and I'm not exaggerating, you could literally see a 2-week backup and delay in the way that they get things done. So it's actually really selfish and quite insidious if you don't deal with something right now that you could. There's a really famous, very, very famous productivity strategy that's been around for a long time by Brian Tracy called Eat the Frog. Anyone ever heard of that? Eat the Frog? Okay, great. He stole it from Mark Twain, so it doesn't even matter. It's Brian Tracy. But basically, the idea of Eat the Frog, which, well, again, was Mark Twain's, was that the first thing that basically every day, like, you should start by eating a frog, because after that, everything else is easier. That was the idea. And Brian Tracy basically took this to be like, do your hardest task first, because that is going to be the thing that'll make it so everything else is easier. Now, this is, in my opinion, some of the worst productivity advice that has ever graced the face of the earth, and has caused some serious problems for people. Because if you decide to get up and start your day and do your hardest task, first of all, we do different, like, as I said before, we do things better at different times of the day. And I'm going to talk about that. But you may not be able to do whatever that hardest task is really well first thing in the morning. Let's say you have to write something, you have to write an article, or you have to respond to emails, or you have to make customer service calls, or you have to schedule something, whatever it might be. If you decide to do that first thing in the morning or first thing in your workday, and that is not an ideal thing for you to do, and in doing so, you are delaying other people from getting things done, it's very, very bad. So deal with it right now if you can. Not to mention, progress begets progress. The more you get done, the more you will want to and be able to get done. Neurochemically, there's dopamine hits that come from that, but it's a snowballing effect in a good way. Now, dealing with it could include delegating. If you delegate effectively and you hand something off to somebody and you provide the right communication, the right resources, then in that moment you are effectively done and you can move on. The third D is the most interesting and complex in some ways, which is to defer. So if you can't say no and you can't deal with it right now, you have to decide when and possibly where is a more effective time for you to deal with that thing. Now, this is not about saying, I'll deal with it later. This is not procrastination, which is a fear-based activity. This is very actively saying, I know that I will do this better, faster, and more effectively at this particular time. So one of the ways that we can think about that is that every one of us has something called peak time. Some research would call it biological prime time. So there is a 90-minute period in the day where every one of you is more productive and more effective than any other time of the day. And with 40 or so people on this call, the odds that there is a crossover is actually quite slim. Everybody has, I mean, 90 minutes a day, there's going to be some crossover, but 6 people in a room, you have very, very different peak times. I've seen people with peak times at 4 in the morning. I've seen 11 o'clock at night. I had one client who had one at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, which is, to me, is awful, but I mean, that's what it was. We can't really fight it. My peak time is between 10 and noon, which is actually really convenient. And it's not something that you can really change too much. In terms of effectiveness, what we mean in that peak time setting is that you are most able during that time to drop into what's known as a flow state, right? So flow state can mean different things to different people, but generally, most universally, it's where we experience a dilation of time. So if you've ever been doing an activity where it felt like hours went by in a matter of minutes, that was very likely a flow state. It's a hypersensitive, hyperactive state of our brains. Conversely, if you've ever had a traumatic event or a car accident or something like that, you might remember every millisecond of what happened because dilation of time works the other way and slows it down. Our brain can do that. So there are a couple different ways to figure out your peak time. I'll do a follow-up about that because it'll take a little bit too much time to explain right now. But you also might have a sense of what that is. So if you know when your peak time is, and you protect that and use that for your sort of highest and best work, you can basically spider web off of that and figure out other times to do other things. So again, for example, for me, I am really not very good on the phone before noon. I'm not sure why. It's been that way for a very long time. When I was doing sales calls years ago, when I was doing coaching calls, I just didn't come across very well on the phone. It was before noon. So I would do my best to try to schedule my phone calls in the afternoon. I cannot do anything of much creative value before 9 or 10 o'clock at night. Part of that is that we tend to be more creative when we're tired, which is kind of annoying, but it is what it is. When we're tired, we're less likely to shoot down the bad ideas, basically. But what that means is that at 9 in the morning, if I got an email from one of the multiple publications that I've written for over the years, and they're like, "Hey, all right, we need an article on, email management," I could be like, "Okay, great. I'm going to hit and 9:30 start writing," and 3 hours later have absolutely nothing. Whereas if I were to defer that and say, "Okay, I'm going to deal with this at 10 o'clock at night tonight," 20 minutes later, I'd have like the best blog post I'd ever written because it's like know thyself. So we can start to batch different activities into different times as much as possible. And this could be hours, it could also be days. So a lot of people will do like finance Fridays, right? So anything finance related goes to Friday, whether that's an email that's coming in and you're referring that to a Friday, or you have a box that you just put things in. You just don't think about it until Friday. And then Friday, you've got 6 or 7 things to do in that category. And you're not dealing with the switching cost that happens when you try to do what most people would think of as multitasking. So peak time and understanding how we defer things is particularly important. In email, whether you're using Gmail or Outlook or any other tools, most of them now have some sort of snooze function, so you can snooze an email to that time. And again, this is not procrastination. We're not saying I'll get to it later, I'll get to it tomorrow. We're saying no, there is actually a better time for me to do this, and the outcome will be better if I do it at that time. So that's the 3 Ds in a nutshell. I'm going to pause for a second. Does anybody have any questions on that? Or does anybody think that makes sense and that's helpful? Good, great. Andrea is not convinced. No problem. We'll get there. Okay.
No, I like it. I just I think more like you said, it's unconventional. So I always thought there was conventional thinking around like the what was the second one? The
Deal with it now.
Deal with it now, which is pretty much how I function, I think, in work. But that then you're sort of constantly multitasking 50,000 things at once. And now I've set aside the first thing that I started to try to be productive on, and then I forgot and I haven't gone back to it. And so like there's that disruption of flow. And I'm curious what you think about that, how it aligns with deal with it now.
Yeah. So there, as I said, it's got to be something that takes less than 3 minutes and doesn't require a big mental shift. That's kind of that's really the key thing. And that's something that is it's a learned skill from going through that habit. But the idea is essentially, and it is hard initially to be able to look at something and be like, yeah, okay, I can do that right now. Or no, not right now. Right. And being really protective of our time. But it is a balance, and it's totally fair point that it seems like then you're just sort of ping-ponging. But if it's something that you can deal with now that can sort of move the needle for you or for somebody else that you're dealing with, then there's the progress that comes from that sort of makes it a worthwhile use of your time, essentially, if that makes sense. Okay, moving on, and then again, we can always come back to things if you want. Excuse me. So the second one is still in communication is asynchronous communication. So the opposite of what we're doing right now, right? So this is synchronous communication. So this is a really interesting one for me because I would say that about 99% of the communication that I do in my day and my life is asynchronous. All of you do asynchronous communication, but many of you probably do not use it as an asynchronous tool. So text messaging, for example, is an asynchronous communication tool. The problem for many people is that the way that they'll send a text message is that they do this, right? They send a text message and then they're like this. 3 bubbles, right? Right, and then they're waiting and they're sucked in, right? And that's not the way it works. You're supposed to send the message and then put it down and sort of move on with your life. So this is a mindset thing for the most part. A lot of people, and this has been studied in numerous different sort of ways, they see communication tools as a leash, and this might be subconscious, but they see it as a leash that the outside world can use to tug on them and pull on their attention whenever they want. But we have to shift that to say to ourselves that these are our tools for communicating with our world the way that we want to. Now, of course, some of you are going to be in corporate settings or other groups where you're going to be limited in your ability to do that. We want to do this to the best that we possibly can. So there are the tool, again, as I said before, the tools don't really matter. I am pretty much technology agnostic, but there is a tool that I really like to use for this, which is called Voxer, Voxer. So anybody have ever used the Nextel phones where you push to talk? Like it's kind of like that, but it's an app. If you've ever sent a voice message using iMessage, or you've done it with Telegram or WhatsApp, very, very similar to that. It is primarily a voice messaging app. One of the things that is extremely unique about it is that it is the only tool, well, actually up until last week, it was the only tool, I guess their patent ran out, that allows you to not only communicate asynchronously, but also synchronously. So if you're sending an iMessage audio, and you talk for 5 minutes, it has to upload, if you have Signal, which in Princeton is iffy, you have to then download it. The person who's listening to it has to download it, and then they have to listen to it and they respond. And so a 5-minute message can turn into, maybe 15 or 20 minutes of somebody's time collectively. With Voxer, within 0.2 seconds of me starting to talk, the person on the other end can begin to listen live, if they're there. If they're not, they can listen to it later. So this is a really fascinating tool and a really fascinating, to me, way of operating. Because, as I said, 99% of the communication I do is asynchronous. So my primary business is business coaching. I work with entrepreneurs all over the world to help them operate more effectively. My business program is called The Replaceable Founder. I make entrepreneurs more replaceable so that they can create systems and processes that replace what they do well. And so when I started coaching a decade ago, or I guess 12 years ago, I would do the typical sort of therapist model where I would meet with my clients once a week for an hour, and then they could email me in between if they wanted to, which is at the time essentially limited me to like 12 clients basically at any given time, because that was it. Not only was just 12 hours a week plus the emailing, but it was kind of exhausting, honestly, to manage that many people's things for that long amount of time. Currently, I do all of my coaching over Voxer. and I'm working with 26 entrepreneurs in 11 time zones. And I spend about 15 minutes a day coaching all of those clients. So they can email, they can send me a message whenever they want, as often as they want. I have most of my clients I speak to every single day, but it might be for a minute or two. And what's so fascinating to me about, we're talking about peak time and about being more effective. Is it bet I have, so this was started as a way of being more convenient for me, but it has turned out to be a much more effective form of coaching. Because is it better for somebody to have a blow up with their business partner or fire somebody or whatever on a Thursday, and they have to wait till next Wednesday for our scheduled appointment at noon to spend 45 minutes to get the 3-minute answer that they need? Or is it better for them to walk out of that meeting, sit, yell and scream every curse imaginable into the Voxer to me, get it off their chest, I respond to them 4 hours later with the 90-second answer they need to get on with their life? Now this extends to teams and employees. A lot of teams, a lot of companies will have daily stand-ups or weekly huddles, the 9 a.m. sales meeting, which never works for anybody, because remember peak time, try to get 6 people in a room at 9 a.m. on a Monday and expect more than one of them to be in the right mindset to do that is very, very statistically unlikely. So now we can do this thing over Voxer or over an asynchronous tool. People can check in whenever they want within a 4-hour period, for example. I use this to connect with friends. I use it to talk to my mother, because you can do things at 2, 3, and 4 times speed when there's a message on Voxer, which is really helpful as well. And my mother and I talk more than we ever have now because of Voxer. Because with 5 small children, as I have, 11 and under, it's not easy to find several hours in the day where I don't have something else going on. And even with a 6-month-old baby strapped to my chest, I can send a 30-second message to somebody at any moment that can move that needle forward. So anything, there are so many opportunities. And if you think that this depersonalizes things, for example, like I talked to many of my friends this way. I have friends who have busy lives too. You can use text and photos if you want, but it's primarily voice. And you communicate so much with your voice in terms of the emotion, the tonality, the intention, that it, in my experience, and I've done this with all the clients and all the companies that I've worked with, it really brings people together a lot closer and keeps them more connected. But at the end of the day, this, so I mean, Alan gave you my bio. Like, I've got a lot going on. I'm involved in a lot of different groups, a lot of organizations. I had a shift this morning on the ambulance. This right here, this call that we're on right now is pretty much the only meeting I have scheduled this whole week, right? And I'm doing all these other things because of asynchronous communication. So if you take nothing else away from tonight, I would really implore you to try switching some of the communication that you do from a scheduled meeting, a scheduled call, to an asynchronous form of communication. Whether you use Voxer or anything, it doesn't really matter. But and you might be surprised to find how maybe not initially receptive some people might be to it, but once they see that the effectiveness of it, I've had like 1 out of 100 people decide they really didn't like it. So that's asynchronous communication. Any questions on that? More thoughts or concerns? Cool. Oh, Jeremy, go ahead.
So you sort of alluded to it earlier, but in a corporate setting, I mean, what I struggle with is just being in meetings constantly and then not being able to get to email and being productive. So from the asynchronous world, what do you have any suggestions? Like, how do you adapt that to a more of a corporate environment?
Yeah.
As far as the asynchronous goes.
Yeah. Vicky, you spelled Voxer correctly, and Andrew, I see your question, so thank you. So I've used this with corporate clients all over the place. Roto-Rooter actually uses this now corporately, which is kind of funny because it's a free app. But it does require a culture shift. It really does, because there's so many people who are just so used to getting into meetings. And the truth is that 90% of meetings are totally useless and poorly planned and misused. 30 seconds of my, well, it's 30 seconds of me talking. I mean, so I am answering questions and stuff. She's busy too. And you know, we get to hear each other's voices, I guess. So it's the kind of thing where you can, it's almost never works to go like all or nothing. That's not what you want to do anyway. But even if you could replace like one meeting a week with asynchronous communication, it starts to build very, very quickly, and people see the power of it, because you give somebody back 15 minutes, you give them back an hour. Oh my God, you know, it's amazing. But not only that, it's not just about the time. Like, people really are more effective at different times. You'll give people better answers. They'll get more out of you. And to your point, Andrea, about aligning creativity, there are absolutely times when you can brainstorm back and forth in a synchronous setting. Totally fine. Totally, like, there's legitimate causes for that. But depending on the situation, asynchronous actually proves better, because again, and I'm not like over, this is not hyperbole. Like, getting two people that match up energy at the same time to do a task is really hard and very, very unlikely, much less 3 or 4 people. It becomes nearly impossible at that point, right? So if you have somebody, and I like, I mean, I've done this myself, but I mean, I've facilitated this with clients as well. You can have somebody who has an amazing idea at 3 in the morning and shares that and like feels really passionate about it. And then somebody else can hear that, process it, think about it. And then when their peak time comes around at 2 in the afternoon or 3 in the afternoon or something, they give the greatest idea possible, as opposed to those two people being in a room at noon and just being like, oh yeah, you know, that's a great idea. Let's do that because I'm tired and I want to go to lunch. You know, so it depends on the people and it depends on the scenario, but overall, what we're essentially saying with asynchronous communication is that you're getting everybody that's involved in that communication at their best, which is kind of a hard argument to fight against, in my opinion. Okay. So the next thing I want to talk about, I know that we're getting towards time here, but I'm good to keep going. So is project management to-do list. Okay. So how many of you have a to-do list of some sort? Okay. And how many of them are like handwritten? Just curious. Just, thank you for coming back into the frame, Sam, for that. Okay. Nothing wrong with that in and of itself. And I will preface this by saying, if you love your to-do list and you're like, yes, my to-do list is my source of truth and makes me feel more powerful, then you can ignore everything I'm about to say if you want. The problem with to-do lists for most people is that they are used incorrectly, because we've never learned. No, I don't think any of you ever had a class on to-do lists. I don't think they ever taught it in home ec. I never had one on to-do lists or email. Like, it's not something that's taught. So we just see this vertical list of things, and we write things and we scratch them out and put little post notes and different things. And it actually is a really bad thing for our brains, because something called the Zeigarnik effect. And I'll try to make this quick. I wouldn't normally go into this level of depth, but she was a really famous researcher during, and I think she was Jewish actually, during World War II, before World War II maybe, but she was in Germany. She was a Russian doctoral student in Germany. And essentially she identified this phenomenon, which is this voice that pushes us to complete the uncompleted, basically. The Zeigarnik effect is actually a measurable thing where information that is interrupted goes into this sort of place between the short-term and mid-term memory or whatever. It's more easily recalled. But again, at the end of the day, it's this voice that pushes us to complete the uncompleted. Because every person, no matter how bad a procrastinator you might be, we all like to complete things. Like, that's what human beings seek, closure in every kind of form we can. Might take others longer than some longer than others, but that's what we want. So the problem with most to-do lists, especially the vertical ones, is that when you look at them, your brain starts to say, like, you should do that one now, do that one now. And many times the things that we have on our to-do list are things that we can't do right now, because either we're waiting on somebody else to do something first, or it's too big of a task. I have seen 7 times on different people's to-do lists, write book. Right now, that is not a to-do list item. It's barely a goal, right? Publish might be the goal, publish a book, but write a book is guaranteeing that you will never write that book. So your brain sees all these things that you can't do right now, but it wants you to do them right now, and it just gets this, like, this cognitive dissonance happens. We can't make a right from 2 wrongs, because what happens is that all you see at a subconscious level is all the stuff you're not getting done, which is not a recipe for being productive. So the problem with the to-do list as it is, whether you're doing it technologically or not, is that most people use them sideways, right? They should not be vertical. None of us read, well, I don't think anybody here is a native Mandarin speaker, but none of us are reading vertically, right? We go left to right. I am speaking to a lot of people who speak Hebrew, I get that, but most of us go left to right. And I think that in the American community we live in, I'm pretty used to going left to right. So that's what your to-do list should look like. There is a Japanese method called the Kanban method, Kanban. Might be Kanban, I've never quite figured it out. But it means billboard in Japanese, which is completely irrelevant to this conversation, but I like to share it. It's essentially an assembly line idea, and it was created by, or it was championed by Toyota, lean manufacturing in the turn of the century, essentially the 20s. So every to-do list should have 3 phases, and I'm going to give you an example of how you. Hey, nice, exactly. Well, wait, is that what you're using though, Andrea? Okay, good.
No, I just Googled it. I like that.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. So this is an AI generated version of one. I asked it to make one really quickly. So to do, it should be to do. Apparently AI can't write on images, but to do, doing, done. So there is a technological solution for this, but I want to show it to you this way. So to do, doing, done is the simplest way that we can sort of present this, and that's this arc, right? Now, I don't have to tell you anything. If any of you had a guess, where are we trying to go from to? I think you know, right? Going left to right. What's really important about this is that we know inherently where to focus right now when we're looking at this list. And I think, I'm assuming you guys do too. Now, to do, doing, done is the most basic form of this. We're essentially looking for an arc of things I have to do, things I'm doing, and things that I have done. A lot of people, they'll cross something off their list, or if they're using a digital version, they'll delete it. We don't want to do that. We actually need to move things to done. It's an important neurological step in this process. If I was working with a bunch of real estate brokers, which I've done before, this list might look like prospective property, first visit, second visit, offer made, purchase, renovated, sold, whatever it might be. It's still the same arc, right? To do, doing, done. If I'm recruiting people, right? New applicant, background check done, references received, interview, hired, onboard, right? It's an assembly line is what we want. But again, at the heart of it, a personal to-do list, and even for some business ones, this is great. And this is what I use personally. So each post-it note here represents a task, and it could be anything, although we really do want to try to break tasks down into things that we can actually do. Ideally, we want to break tasks into things that we can do in 15 minutes, if possible. Now, you're not going to necessarily do that in the to-do list, but your to-do list could say, maybe it says write book, right? But the doing list today is write one chapter, write one page, right? And we can pull that out of that. And we have this sense of movement. This is dynamic. And let's say we take 3 things off our to-do list and put them in the doing list for the day. And these are the 3 things that we're going to do today. But we only get to 2 of them. Move that 3rd one back and start the next day, right? So because we're telling ourselves there is one place where we need to focus right now. I don't need to look at the to-do. I did that already. And that might be the night before. That might be the first thing in the morning where you plan what you're going to do that day. But then you're done with the to-do list. And when you are actually done, you move it to done, not only because there is something importantly neurological about that, but you show me a task that you think is a unique task that you'll never do again, and I will show you where you're wrong. There's almost no such thing as a completely unique task, and there will almost definitely be some element of that task that comes up again. So when you're doing this in a digital form, then you can actually search for that. So I'll show you what it looks like really quickly in a digital form. I use a tool called Trello, which is free. And so this is my to-do, doing, and done. Now in my to-do, I have all the big organizations and projects that I'm involved in, from the Jewish Center to this is a business education institute, to the rescue squad. And from these, I can pull out an individual task, for example. So if I want, like for the rescue squad, let's say I want to do we're going to do a drill on poison control. So I want to turn this into a card right there. Okay, so now that's a card, and here, and now I'm going to go do. And I'm gonna work on that today, and then I can move it to done. No different than using Post-it notes, just a little handier, and you can do it on your phone. And I think it's a really nice tool. This is called Trello. Excellent, excellent tool for managing projects. You can bring in other people to these lists. So I could actually assign this to somebody, that's me, but I can assign it to somebody else if they're on here. I can assign it to a spouse, an assistant, a partner, a graphic designer, whatever it might be. I can put a due date on here if I want to, which tells me that that's when I need to, get it done. And on Trello, if you're within 24 hours of the due date, it turns yellow. If it's past the due date, it turns red. If it's well within the due date, it's green. Really, really easy to sort of keep track of things. And then again, if I have other people on here, I can make comments on here as well on each card if I need to. But I don't want to get too complicated with technology. As I said, the point of this is that flip your to-do list on its side and start looking at it in terms of this arc. Okay. So we're at 9 o'clock here. I can totally keep going on stuff, but I want to be respectful first of all. So did anybody have any questions about that? Did that make sense? I know I'm going quickly. Cool. Okay. So sorry. The last let's see, the last two things I think I want to cover. One is outsourcing of some form or fashion, and the other one is some automation. So there's two tools. This is technology now that I want to talk about. So one, in terms of automation. So the first one, I'll share my screen again, is called IFTTT, which stands for if this, then that. Now, this is a web app. It is also an app that can go on your phone. There are some very complex automation tools out there. This is not a complicated one. This is a really, really great way to get started with automation in your life. And the way to think about automation here is if you find yourself using the word every time I leave the house, every time I check my email, every time I call so-and-so, the word every should start to be a trigger for you that there is some element of what you're doing that can and probably should be automated because it's repetitive. Now, with IFTTT, you want it's right in the name. If this, then that. So if something happens here, do this over here. If I post something on Facebook, I also want to post it on LinkedIn, right? If I take a selfie, I want to send that to somebody or whatever. You could say, if the weather is if it says it's going to rain, send me a text message reminding me to get my umbrella. Some of these things may sound kind of trivial, but it's getting in the habit of thinking about automation. And automation for me is not just about saving money or running all the time. It's about not letting things fall through the cracks, right? So I have automations in place that, when my kids get to school, I get a notification about that because of a tool like this, like IFTTT. I can say to the ALEXA devices, smart hub devices, I can't say it because she'll start doing stuff. If I say to her to add something to my to-do list, it'll create a Trello card for me in my list, which is where I keep my to-do list, which means that no matter where I am in my home, I can, if I have the baby in my hands, I can say, so-and-so, remind me to do this. And the next thing I know, within a minute or two, there is a to-do list item on my Trello list. So what you should do with IFTTT is you can look at it and you can start to look at, I'll just log in really quick. You can look at tools that you use every day, right? So maybe it's Gmail, maybe it's Google Docs, maybe it's iPhone photos, and you can start to see some things that you can do with those. So I'll just take an example here. Let's do Gmail, for example, right? So I can say that, let's see. Hold on, let me see if there's a decent one here. Yeah, so, okay, well, anytime I take a selfie, send it to myself with Gmail. Automatically send email via Gmail when a Stripe payment fails. So that's if you're taking credit cards. notify your neighbor when your mower needs attention. So the there's like a Roomba that's a mower that's made by Husqvarna. So apparently it can let you know, or through this tool, it can let you know if it needs servicing or something. So weather, this is Weather Underground, which is an app some of you might use. Send that to you by email. Send Instagram photos, anyone. So if you post something on Instagram, you want to send it to a friend that's not on Instagram automatically, you can do that. So all of these things that you might otherwise have to take 10 seconds, 20 seconds, a minute to do, you can start to think about ways that you can actually completely automate these. So again, I would say go to IFTTT and look at apps that you use on a regular basis, and then see what automations you can do with them. YouTube's a great, if you like a video on YouTube, it can save that to a list for you to look at later automatically, for example. Okay, and then the last one, yeah, sorry. The last one I want to show you is an outsourcing one, which is a website called Fiverr. So there are a number of different outsourcing platforms out there. There's Upwork, Elance, Guru. There's tons of them out there, and a lot of them are not very good, in my opinion, because they don't do a really good job sort of vetting and protecting consumers. Fiverr is a really fascinating. It's actually an Israeli company, and was originally started as a marketplace for people to do things for $5. $5 goes a lot longer way in a lot of other countries. So you could have somebody in Indonesia who would transcribe 30 minutes of audio for $5, right? You have somebody here who will create a 3D model of a floor plan for you for $25. Somebody who can translate things. I've actually, one time I used Fiverr because somebody, this is years ago, but a client of mine had a friend in Israel who they hadn't heard from in a few days, and they were getting worried. And we were able to find somebody on Fiverr who happened to live locally and went and checked on them, and it turned out to be fine. You can have graphic design stuff done. You can have things written. So if there is something where it's like, oh gosh, I have 100 receipts that I need to scan, and have somebody put them into an Excel spreadsheet, you can probably find some. Or I know you can find somebody on Fiverr to do that. And they have ratings and reviews for all those different things. So that is, I think that's probably enough to cover for this evening. I don't want to overload everybody and take too much time, but I could go on and on. So if there's any questions, please let me know. I'm happy to stay on and take some more questions if you have them. But if a couple of you wouldn't mind just sharing, not just for my sake, but for everybody listening, because I always think this is useful, say what you think the most helpful thing was that you heard in the last hour. You don't have to all do it, but just a couple of you would be great. I think it helps reinforce. Yeah, this time next week, I'm happy to make a series out of this. But anyone want to share something that they found really helpful, because it actually helps reinforce the concepts for other people. 3Ds, thanks, Sam. Kanban board, cool. Moshe, are you waving away a flyer? Do you have a question? You're muted. You're muted. Still muted. Using the to-do list that works for you. Thank you. Asynchronous communication. Thanks, Bob. Go ahead, Moshe.
Doing to-do list side to side, the 3 columns, that was worth the whole time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Like I said, some of the stuff is sort of counterintuitive. Yeah, redoing your to-do list. Awesome. Different peak times. Oh, so for peak time, I will tell you, so I created an app like 8 years ago, maybe, called the Less Doing Peak Time app that is available on iPhone. It's a free app.
You can raise your hand and he'll acknowledge you. Oh. Just raise your hand.
Well, anyway, so Less Doing Peak Time app. You can check that out. Go ahead, Roberta's husband.
That's Ephraim.
Hi, Ephraim.
Hi. So when I worked, a lot of people say, well, I work well under pressure. I don't work well under pressure. I happen to have worked very well under pressure. And I used to juggle a lot of things all at the same time, all day long. And I found it very satisfying that at the end of the day, all my stuff was done. This was as computers were coming into play. So my question is, could I have worked a little better with time management, even though at the end of every day, all my stuff was done and I went home?
I mean, so look, I mean, we can always be more productive, right? But that's not the goal. That's not my goal.
Right.
Being more productive is doing more, right? And being more efficient is doing more with less. But being more effective is doing the right things, and that's really the goal. So, without having a longer conversation about the specifics of your situation, I couldn't make an assessment on how effective you were.
That's a conversation for the future. Yes.
There you go. I'm very happy to have it. But look, you know, the thing is, like,
but I'm retired now, so it doesn't really.
well, you know, look, so there's Kanban, there's also Kaizen, which is another Japanese concept of continual improvement for the good, which is one of the philosophies I live my life by. There's actually a rabbi from Bratislava, I think, that Andy had brought up at one point. And he basically said, if we're not better tomorrow than we are today, then what's the point of tomorrow? Right. So that to me is the definition of success. If I'm 1% better at anything tomorrow than I am today, then I'm successful. So there's always something. That's why I'm now, a lieutenant of an EMT. I'm a woodworker. I'm always trying to add something else that I can not add something else. I'm always trying to find other ways to have an impact.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for all the great comments, by the way. My community activities, ambitious and interest. Well, thank you, Vicky. So I mean, I'm on the board of the Jewish Center, obviously, and I'm the house chair. So anything that breaks or looks bad, you can always tell me about. I can tell Joel, and we can get it done. EMS is extremely important to me, so I'm the vice president of the rescue squad now as well, and I'm unfortunately on the PTO executive board for the middle school. That's very challenging on a regular basis. It's a great challenge, but that's a fun one. And then I am planning on running for mayor actually here in 4 years, which Mark is well aware of and very supportive of. And it's to me that's sort of the next challenge. Eventually, hopefully, we'll see. So always something. I know the water. I already changed it. Well, I'm going to do it again. I also, by the way, I was one of the first LEED accredited professionals in the country, and I built the first LEED accredited building in Suffolk County, and worked on LEED buildings for NYU and for Vornado in the city. So green is another big thing that I'm very passionate about, actually. Yes, the Torah holder is also, and all of the loose handles, or the previously loose handle Torahs, are no longer loose, hopefully, because of my woodworking. So anyway, thank you all, and I'm also going to put a link in here. So if you are so inclined, want to get on Voxer, try it out. It's a great way to get in touch with me. So you can check out this website, voxwithari.com, which explains how it works. And
so I want to thank you, Ari. Honestly, I don't know where to start. I'm going to redo my to-do list. I'm going to stop procrastinating. This was amazing. And I have no doubt that a lot of us are going to go back to the recording to check everything you just told us to do. And all your fantastic ideas. It was amazing. And I know a lot of us are going to start rethinking how we do things. To be more productive, not busier, but more productive.
More effective.
And more effective. Absolutely. I'm going to find a way to add that to my teaching.
The last thing I'll just say, and thank you. The last thing I'll just say is that I really, this is 5% of what I teach, what's been in my books and everything. I love productivity challenges and helping people with them. So if there's ever any questions about anything, any process that you want to do better or automate or outsource or anything, I'm always happy to talk about it and help.
That's great.
And
Thank you so much.
Make it an effective evening.
Yes, it has been. I'm sure I've gotten a lot out of it. Still getting messages. I want to
Happy to
thank
talk about it, Andrew.
I want to thank everybody who joined tonight. We have another Great Minds Salon scheduled for January 18th, and I think you'll all be interested in attending it. It will be our congregant Michelle Alprin talking about her experience as a journalist and how she came to journalism and some of the really interesting interviews and articles she's written. So I know we'll look forward to that, and please look forward to more information about it. So I wish everybody a good rest of the evening. Again, thank you, Ari, for a wonderful presentation. And I wish everybody a good weekend, a happy Thanksgiving, and it's great to see you all.